The telegram had been brief, clinical in its cruelty. Father deceased. Return immediately. Estate matters require attention. But when Sophia Margaret Miller arrived at the depot in Fort Garland, Colorado, on a blistering July afternoon in 1878, she discovered that home was no longer hers to claim. Her stepmother had wasted no time selling the ranch, pocketing the money, and vanishing eastward with a traveling salesman, leaving Sophia with nothing but a battered trunk and a one-way ticket back to Boston, prepaid and non-refundable. The station master had explained it all with uncomfortable sympathy, how the woman had arranged everything, even posting a letter to Sophia's aunt informing her of the girl's imminent return. They shipped her back like a parcel at the depot, labeled and paid for, expected and unwanted all at once. Sophia stood on the weathered platform, 21 years old and suddenly adrift, staring at the trunk that contained everything she owned. The mountain air was thin and sharp, so different from the humid Boston summers she'd endured for 3 years at finishing school. Her father had insisted on it, wanting his only daughter to have the refinement her mother would have given her. Now he was gone, buried 2 weeks already, and she hadn't even been able to say goodbye. The anger that surged through her was hot and bitter, mixing with grief until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The afternoon train would depart in 40 minutes. Sophia had watched them load her trunk into the baggage car with mechanical efficiency, watched the conductor check his pocket watch and nod to himself. Everything was proceeding according to plan, someone else's plan, and she was simply expected to comply. To board that train and return to Boston, to her aunt's cramped apartment and disapproving looks, to a life of teaching piano to ungrateful children, or perhaps, if she was fortunate, making a passable marriage to some merchant's son who needed a presentable wife. She couldn't breathe. The corset was too tight, the traveling dress too heavy, the whole situation too suffocating. Sophia walked away from the platform, away from the waiting train, past the depot building toward the edge of town where the land opened up into vast stretches of sage and grass, where the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose like ancient sentinels against an impossibly blue sky. This had been her home once. She'd spent her first 18 years here, riding across her father's land, helping with the cattle, learning the business from a man who'd never treated her like she was less capable simply because she wore skirts. Then he'd sent her away to become a lady, and everything had fallen apart. The sound of boots on packed earth made her turn. A man approached, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of cedar wood. He carried her trunk on one shoulder as though it weighed nothing, moving with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body. He wore dusty work clothes, a battered hat pushed back on his head revealing dark hair that needed cutting, and there was something in his expression, concern mixed with determination, that made her heart skip unexpectedly. He set the trunk down gently at her feet. His voice when he spoke was deep and steady, with the faint drawl of someone who'd spent his whole life in these mountains. "Miss Miller, I'm Harrison Hayes. I worked for your father." The name stirred a memory, distant and sun-bleached. Her father's letters had mentioned him, the young hand who'd proven himself invaluable, who had a gift with horses and an honest work ethic that was increasingly rare. Sophia studied him more carefully, trying to reconcile the man before her with the faceless ranch hand she'd imagined. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice sounded formal, Eastern, nothing like the girl who'd once galloped across these plains whooping like a wild thing. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The ranch was sold. I have no business here anymore. I know about the ranch." Something flickered across his face, anger perhaps, quickly controlled. I know what your stepmother did. Sold it to Marcus Thornton for half what it was worth, took the money and ran. Thornton's already moved his own men in, but that's not why I'm here." The conductor's whistle sounded, sharp and insistent. 10 minutes until departure. Sophia glanced back at the train, then at Harrison Hayes, confusion knotting her thoughts. "Then why are you here? Why bring my trunk?" "Because I saw you get off that train this morning, saw your face when the station master explained how things stood. Saw them load your trunk like you were cargo being returned to sender." He met her eyes directly. No apology in his gaze, just fierce certainty. "And I figured maybe you didn't want to go. Maybe you wanted to stay if you had a reason to." "Stay." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Stay where? I have no home here, no family, no means of supporting myself. What exactly do you suggest, Mr. Hayes?" "That I camp in the mountains and live off the land. I suggest you marry me." The world tilted. Sophia actually took a step back, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon, marry me." He said it again, calm as if he were discussing the weather. "I've got a good piece of land, 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Been proving it up for the past 3 years. Got another 2 before it's fully mine, but the cabin's solid and the land's good. There's water, timber, grass for cattle. I've got 20 head already and plans for more. It's not what your father had, not yet, but it's honest and it's real and it's a future." "You're insane." But even as she said it, something in her chest was unfurling, some wild hope she didn't dare acknowledge. "You don't even know me. I don't know you. People don't just propose marriage to strangers at train depots. I know you're James Miller's daughter. I know he talked about you every damn day, how smart you were, how you could rope and ride better than half the men he'd employed. I know he sent you east because he wanted you to have choices, but he always hoped you'd come back. And I know you're standing here instead of getting on that train, which tells me maybe you don't want to go back to Boston any more than Boston wants you back." The brutal honesty of that last statement stung, because it was true. Her aunt's letter after her father's death had been perfunctory at best, reminding Sophia that she could return temporarily, but that permanent arrangements would need to be made. There was no real place for her there, no home in the true sense of the word. "This is madness," Sophia said, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. "You can't possibly want to marry me. You don't love me. You don't even know me." Something softened in Harrison's expression. "No, I don't love you. Not yet. But I respected the hell out of your father, and I respect what I know of you. I'm offering you a choice, Miss Miller. Get on that train and go back to a life you don't want, or stay here and build something new. Maybe we'll come to love each other, maybe we won't, but at least you'll be free. At least you'll be home." The train whistle sounded again, long and final. The conductor was calling for passengers. In another minute, they'd close the doors and depart, taking her trunk and her prepaid ticket to a predetermined future. Sophia's mind raced through the implications, the sheer insanity of what he was proposing. Marriage to a stranger, life on an unproven homestead, everything uncertain and risky and completely mad. But when she'd ridden across her father's land as a girl, she'd never felt uncertain. She'd felt alive. And standing here in the thin mountain air with this strange man offering her an impossible choice, she felt that same wild aliveness stirring in her blood. "If I stay," she said slowly, testing the words, "if I agree to this completely insane proposal, I want to be clear about certain things. I'm not some helpless Eastern flower. I can work, I can ride, and I expect to be a true partner in whatever we build. I won't be kept in the kitchen while you make all the decisions." The corner of Harrison's mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "Miss Miller, if I wanted a helpless flower, I wouldn't have pulled your trunk off that train. I need a partner who can help build a ranch, not a decoration. And I won't be rushed into anything. Marriage is binding, and I need to know I'm making the right choice. We'll get married by the justice of the peace tomorrow. You can have the cabin to yourself, and I'll sleep in the barn until you say otherwise, however long that takes. Sophia stared at him, this stranger who was offering her freedom wrapped in the most unconventional package imaginable. The train began to move, slowly at first, then gathering speed. The conductor leaned out, shouting something about her trunk, about the prepaid ticket, but his words were lost in the growing distance. Harrison lifted her trunk again, this time with clear intention, and said simply, "Stay." The word hung in the air between them, neither command nor plea, but something else entirely. An invitation. A door opening onto an unknown future that was at least hers to choose. Sophia took a deep breath of mountain air, tasting pine and sage and possibility, and made the kind of decision that finishing school had certainly never prepared her for. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." Harrison's whole face changed, relief and something warmer flooding his features. He extended his free hand, and when Sophia took it, his grip was warm and calloused and steady. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I promise you won't regret this." Sophia wasn't sure she believed him, but she was certain she'd regret getting on that train. Harrison loaded her trunk onto a wagon hitched nearby, helped her up onto the seat with old-fashioned courtesy, and they started out of Fort Garland toward the mountains. The town was small but bustling, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sophia could feel eyes on them as they passed, could practically hear the gossip starting to percolate. The Miller girl, back for barely a day and already riding off with Harrison Hayes. By tomorrow, it would be all over the county. The thought should have mortified her, but instead she felt oddly liberated. Let them talk. For the first time in 3 years, she was doing exactly what she wanted, consequences be damned. "Tell me about your land," she said as they left the town behind. "How did you manage to claim a homestead while working for my father?" Harrison kept his eyes on the rough trail, guiding the horses with easy skill. "I worked for your father during branding season and roundups, when he needed extra hands. The rest of the time I was building my cabin, clearing land, starting my herd. Your father knew about it, even helped me out some. Sold me my first cattle at a fair price, gave me advice. He was a good man." The past tense was a knife edge. Sophia swallowed hard. "How did he die?" "The telegram just said he was deceased. No details. Threw him from his horse crossing a creek. Water was high from snowmelt, horse spooked, and he hit his head on a rock. Was gone before anyone found him." Harrison's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry you couldn't be here. He would have wanted you here." "My stepmother didn't send for me until after the funeral. I think she was afraid I'd contest the sale." "Would you have?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." Sophia stared at the mountains rising before them. "It doesn't matter now. What's done is done." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves clopping steadily against the packed earth. The land opened up around them, vast and beautiful and harsh. Sophia had forgotten how much sky there was out here, how it seemed to stretch forever, making her feel simultaneously insignificant and infinite. "You can change your mind," Harrison said suddenly. "If you wake up tomorrow and realize this is too crazy, I'll take you back to town. We can find another solution." Sophia looked at him, at the strong profile and the careful way he held himself, and felt a strange flutter of something that might have been attraction or might have just been gratitude. It was too soon to tell. "Do you want me to change my mind?" "No." The word was immediate and honest. "But I want you to be sure. I want you to want this." "I want to not go back to Boston," Sophia said carefully. "Beyond that, I'm not sure what I want yet. Is that honest enough?" That's honest enough. The trail climbed steadily into the foothills, winding between pine trees and outcroppings of red rock. They passed a few scattered homesteads, small cabins with ambitious gardens and ragged cattle grazing on sparse grass. Each little claim represented someone's dream, someone's gamble on the future. Sophia wondered how many would succeed, how many would give up and return east with their tails between their legs. She wondered which category she'd fall into. Harrison's land, when they reached it, was better than she'd expected. A creek ran through the property, clear and cold with mountain snowmelt. The cabin was small but well built, chinked logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. There was a barn, more of a large shed really, but solid enough. A corral held several horses, and cattle grazed in a meadow that stretched toward the tree line. "It's not much yet," Harrison said, and there was vulnerability in his voice that made him suddenly more real, more human. "But it will be. Give it time." Sophia climbed down from the wagon before he could help her, needing to feel the ground under her feet to take the measure of this place that might become her home. The air smelled like pine and sun-warmed grass. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. In the distance, the mountains were turning gold and purple in the late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Harrison carried her trunk into the cabin, and Sophia followed, curious despite herself. The interior was surprisingly neat. One main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, a kitchen area with a good iron stove. A door led to what she assumed was the bedroom, and Harrison headed straight there, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "This is yours," he said. "I'll bunk in the barn like I said. There's well water outside and the creek's good for washing. I've got supplies, basic things, but we can go into town tomorrow after we see the justice of the peace. Get whatever you need." Sophia stood in the doorway, looking at the bed with its simple quilt, the trunk that contained her entire life, this stranger who was offering her everything and asking for nothing, at least not yet. The whole situation felt surreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's story. "Harrison," she said, and using his first name felt oddly intimate. "Why are you really doing this? The truth." He was quiet for a long moment, standing by the window backlit by the golden afternoon sun. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because I watched your stepmother sell your birthright out from under you for pocket money. Because I saw you standing on that platform looking lost and angry and heartbroken, and I knew that feeling. My own family lost everything when I was 16, had to give up our farm in Missouri and head west with nothing. I know what it's like to have the ground cut out from under you. And I thought, if I can give you back some of what you lost, if I can offer you a choice when everyone else is telling you what you have to do, then maybe that's worth something. Maybe that's enough of a reason to start a marriage." It was, Sophia realized, possibly the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. No romantic declarations, no false promises of love, just raw truth and genuine kindness. She found, unexpectedly, that it meant more than poetry would have. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the choice, for this." He nodded, then moved past her carefully, giving her space. "I'll leave you to settle in. There's bread and cheese in the kitchen if you're hungry, and I'll make something proper for supper. Tomorrow we'll go into town early, get the legalities sorted out." After he left, Sophia sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just done. She'd agreed to marry a man she didn't know, to live in a cabin in the mountains, to build a life from nothing. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the first real choice she'd made in years. That night they ate supper at the small table, venison stew that Harrison had made in a cast iron pot. He was a better cook than she'd expected, and she said so, which made him shrug self-consciously. "You learn to cook when you're feeding yourself," he said. "Can't live on jerky and beans forever." "I can cook too," Sophia offered. "My father insisted I learn before I went east, said a woman should know how to feed herself and others, regardless of her station. He was a wise man." They talked carefully, trading small pieces of information like careful negotiators. Harrison was 26, had come west with his family after the war, lost them to cholera on the trail. He'd worked various ranches for years, saving every penny, waiting for his chance at land of his own. He liked horses better than cattle, preferred mountains to plains, and thought Fort Garland was as close to perfect as a place could get. Sophia told him about Boston, about the suffocating propriety of finishing school, about how she'd never quite fit in with the other girls who seemed to genuinely enjoy embroidery and watercolors and learning to pour tea correctly. She told him about missing her father, about the letters that had kept them connected across the distance. She didn't tell him about the loneliness, about feeling caught between two worlds and belonging to neither, but she thought maybe he understood anyway. When the dishes were washed and the sun had set behind the mountains, Harrison bid her good night and headed to the barn with a blanket and pillow. Sophia watched him go, then barred the cabin door and prepared for bed in the small bedroom that smelled of pine and soap and possibility. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. Coyotes singing in the distance, the creek burbling over stones, wind in the pines. She thought about the train she'd refused to board, about her aunt who would receive a telegram instead of a niece, about the absolute madness of what she'd agreed to. But when she finally slept, she slept deeply, and she didn't dream of Boston at all. Morning came cold and bright. Sophia dressed in her simplest traveling dress, brushed her hair and pinned it up, and emerged from the cabin to find Harrison already up, tending to the horses. He looked tired, and she wondered if he'd slept at all on the hard barn floor. "We don't have to do this today," she said. "If you want more time to think about it." Harrison turned, and his smile was small but genuine. "I've done nothing but think about it. I'm sure if you are." They rode into Fort Garland side by side. Sophia on a gentle mare that Harrison said had been her father's favorite, Harrison on a rangy gelding that clearly adored him. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made everything seem possible. The justice of the peace was a weathered man named Samuel Garrett, who'd known Sophia's father and didn't bother hiding his surprise when they explained their business. He looked from Sophia to Harrison and back again, bushy eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. "You two are sure about this?" "This seems mighty sudden." "We're sure," Sophia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. They stood in Garrett's small office, Sophia holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Harrison had picked that morning, a detail that had surprised and touched her. There were no rings, no fancy dress, no family or friends to witness. Just the justice of the peace reading the words that would bind them together, and two people taking a leap of faith into an uncertain future. "Do you, Harrison Samuel Hayes, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Sophia Margaret Miller, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Sophia looked at Harrison, at the hope and uncertainty in his cedarwood eyes, and thought about trains and trunks and doors opening onto new lives. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride if you're so inclined." Harrison looked at Sophia, a question in his gaze. She nodded just slightly, and he leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste and sent an unexpected warmth through her entire body. When he pulled back, his ears were slightly red, and Sophia found that endearing. They signed the papers, paid the fee, and walked out into the morning sunshine as husband and wife. It felt strange and new and terrifying, like standing on the edge of a cliff and choosing to jump. They stopped at the general store, and Harrison insisted on buying supplies, fabric for new dresses, practical things Sophia would need. She tried to protest the expense, but he was quietly stubborn about it, saying only that they were partners now, and partners invested in each other. News of their marriage spread through town with predictable speed. By the time they left the store, several women had stopped to offer congratulations mixed with barely concealed curiosity. Sophia held her head high, smiled politely, and let Harrison guide her back to the wagon with a gentle hand on her elbow. "That'll be all over the county by sunset," he said as they headed out of town. "Let them talk." Sophia surprised herself with how little she cared. We know the truth of it. And what's the truth? She thought about it. That we're two people trying to make the best of difficult circumstances. That we're being practical and honest about it. That maybe that's not such a terrible foundation for a marriage. Harrison glanced at her, something warm in his expression. "I think your father would approve. He was always practical." Back at the cabin, they fell into an awkward domesticity. Sophia unpacked her trunk properly, hanging her dresses on pegs, arranging her few books on a shelf Harrison had built. She found herself constantly aware of him, of his presence in the space, the way he moved through the cabin with easy familiarity. He worked outside most of the day, tending cattle, mending fence, chopping wood for winter. She explored the property, reacquainting herself with the land she'd missed, and began planning a garden for the spring. The first few days were strange, both of them carefully polite, navigating around each other like dancers learning new steps. Harrison continued to sleep in the barn despite Sophia's increasingly guilty protests. She cooked meals, and he praised everything even when her biscuits came out hard as rocks. They talked over supper, gradually growing more comfortable, trading stories and opinions and dreams. On the fourth night, Sophia couldn't bear it anymore. She found Harrison in the barn, settling down on a pile of hay with his thin blanket, and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "This is ridiculous," she announced. "You're sleeping in your own barn while I have a perfectly good bed with plenty of room. It's getting colder at night and this can't be comfortable, and I feel terrible about it." Harrison sat up, hay in his hair, looking tired and uncertain. "I told you I'd give you time. I meant it. I know you did, and I appreciate it, but this isn't sustainable. We're married. We're supposed to be partners. Partners don't let each other freeze in barns." She took a breath. "I'm not saying anything has to happen, but you should sleep in an actual bed. We can figure out the rest as we go." He studied her face for a long moment, then slowly stood. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Come inside." They walked back to the cabin together, and Sophia tried to ignore the way her heart was racing. This was practical, she told herself. Sensible. They couldn't go on like this forever. In the bedroom, they prepared for sleep with careful modesty, Harrison changing in the main room while Sophia got ready in the bedroom. When he finally came in wearing only his undershirt and trousers, Sophia was already under the covers on the far side of the bed, giving him plenty of space. He slid in carefully, keeping a respectful distance. The bed was small enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the clean scent of soap and hay, and something uniquely him. They lay in the darkness, both rigid with awareness. "Thank you," Harrison said quietly. "For this, for all of it." "You're welcome." Sophia stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement. "Harrison?" "Yeah, I'm glad I stayed." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Me too." Sleep was a long time coming, But when Sophia finally drifted off, it was with a strange sense of rightness, as though pieces of her life were finally clicking into place. The days began to develop a rhythm. Harrison taught Sophia about the cattle, about managing the land, about the dreams he had for expanding the herd and eventually rivaling the larger ranches. She soaked it up like a flower after rain, remembering skills her father had taught her, adding new ones. She could already ride well, but Harrison taught her to rope properly, to read the signs of illness in cattle, to predict weather by watching the sky and feeling the wind in turn. Sophia improved the homestead in ways Harrison hadn't had time for. She organized the cabin, created systems for storing supplies, made curtains from the fabric he'd bought. She taught him to read better, spending evenings going over books by lamplight, delighting in his quick mind and genuine curiosity. They worked side by side, building something together, and slowly the careful politeness began to shift into something warmer, more real. 3 weeks after their wedding, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing early snow and howling winds. They spent the day securing the animals, bringing in extra wood, preparing for the possibility of being snowed in. By evening, the world outside was white and wild, and inside the cabin, the fire burned bright and warm. Sophia made stew while Harrison tended the fire, and they ate with the wind rattling the shutters and snow piling against the windows. It felt cozy and intimate, the two of them safe and warm while the world raged outside. "Winter comes early in the mountains," Harrison said, watching the fire. "Sometimes it hits hard in October and doesn't let up until May." "I remember." Sophia poured coffee, handed him a cup. "My father used to say that winter separated the serious ranchers from the dreamers. The ones who prepared survived. The ones who didn't. He was right." Harrison sipped his coffee, and in the firelight his face was all angles and shadows. "Are you sorry you stayed, now that you're stuck here for the winter?" Sophia considered the question honestly. "No, I miss my father. I'm angry about what my stepmother did, but I'm not sorry I stayed. This feels more like home than Boston ever did. Even married to a stranger. You're not really a stranger anymore, are you?" She met his eyes across the table. "I know you take your coffee black. I know you favor your left leg when it's going to rain because you broke it badly as a boy. I know you sing to the horses when you think no one's listening, and you're terrible at it, but they don't seem to mind. I know you read the same paragraph 3 times when you're tired but too stubborn to admit it. That's not stranger territory." Harrison's expression softened. "I know you talk to yourself when you're working through a problem. I know you're left-handed, but your finishing school teachers forced you to write with your right. So your penmanship is beautiful, but your hand cramps after a page. I know you're afraid of spiders but won't kill them, so you make me take them outside. I know you sing hymns while you cook, even though you told me you don't believe in organized religion." "I believe in something," Sophia protested. "Just not necessarily what the churches teach. I know." His smile was warm. "You believe in being good because it's right, not because someone's keeping score for the afterlife." They cleaned up together, moving around the small space in comfortable synchronization, and Sophia realized with a start that they'd developed routines, patterns, a shared life. When had that happened? When had this stopped being an arrangement and started being a marriage? That night, lying beside Harrison in the darkness with the storm howling outside, Sophia found herself moving closer, seeking his warmth. He responded carefully, his arm coming around her, pulling her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, feel the rise and fall of his breathing. "Is this all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes, more than all right." It felt safe and right and good. "Harrison, I think I might be falling in love with you." She felt him go still, then his arms tightened around her. Yeah, yeah. She tilted her head back, trying to see his face in the darkness. Is that all right? His laugh was low and warm. Sophia, that's more than all right. I've been half in love with you since you told the justice of the peace you were sure about marrying me. Been trying not to rush you, trying to give you space, but I think about you constantly. Dream about you. Want you. Heat flooded through her at that last word, at the rough honesty in his voice. Then why are we still being so careful with each other? Because I want this to be real. I want you to be sure. I want this to be what you choose, not just what circumstances forced on you. Sophia pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the faint glow from the banked fire. I choose this. I choose you. I'm sure. Harrison reached up, cupped her face gently, and pulled her down into a kiss that was nothing like the chaste press of lips at their wedding. This was heat and hunger and barely restrained need, and Sophia met it eagerly, months of tension and careful distance finally breaking free. His hands were in her hair, hers were clutching his shoulders, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the careful distance they'd maintained was gone completely. Are you absolutely sure? Harrison asked, his voice rough. I'm absolutely sure. What followed was tender and awkward and achingly sweet. Two people learning each other, figuring out how they fit together. Harrison was gentle, constantly checking that she was all right, and Sophia felt cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. When it was over, they lay tangled together, both breathing hard, and Sophia felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was her husband. This was her home. This was the life she'd chosen, and it was good. I love you, Harrison said against her hair. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I love you. Sophia turned in his arms, pressed a kiss to his jaw. I love you too, and maybe it is fast, maybe it is crazy, but it's ours. That's what matters. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other. And when Sophia woke in the morning to find Harrison watching her with soft eyes and a softer smile, she knew without question that she'd made the right choice. Winter settled in with determination, blanketing the mountains in deep snow and testing the strength of their preparations. Harrison and Sophia worked together to keep the animals fed and healthy, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay from the barn, checking constantly for signs of illness or injury. It was hard, exhausting work, but they did it side by side, and somehow that made it bearable. The long, dark evenings were spent by the fire, reading aloud to each other, playing cards, talking about everything and nothing. Sophia learned about Harrison's childhood in Missouri, about the farm his family had lost, about the long journey west that had cost him everyone he loved. Harrison learned about Sophia's mother, who died when she was 8, about growing up as the only child on a busy ranch, about the complicated relationship she'd had with her father, who loved her fiercely but didn't always know how to show it. He wanted me to have choices, Sophia said one evening, her head in Harrison's lap while he played with her hair. That's why he sent me east. He didn't want me trapped by circumstances, forced into a life I didn't choose. The irony is that the life I would have chosen was exactly what I had here. Maybe he knew that, Harrison suggested. Maybe he wanted you to see what else was out there so you could come back certain, so you'd know you were choosing this life, not just accepting the only option you'd been given. Sophia thought about that. Maybe. I wish I could ask him. I wish I could tell him about you, about this. I think he'd be happy. I know he would be. He talked about you all the time, about how proud he was of you. I think he'd be glad you found your way back here, even if it wasn't the way he'd planned. Christmas came, quiet and simple. They had no decorations, no gifts, but Harrison surprised Sophia by presenting her with a small wooden box he'd carved during his evenings in the barn before they'd become truly married. It was beautiful work, smooth and perfect, with her initials carved into the lid. "It's for keeping special things," he said, almost shy. "Letters, keepsakes, whatever matters to you." Sophia traced the carved letters with one finger, overwhelmed. "Harrison, it's beautiful. I don't have anything for you. You're here. That's gift enough." She kissed him then, trying to pour everything she felt into it, all the gratitude and love and wonder that this was her life now. They made love in front of the fire, slow and sweet, and Sophia thought that no elaborate Christmas in Boston could compare to this simple, perfect moment. The new year arrived with bitter cold and more snow. They were well and truly snowed in now, the drifts reaching halfway up the cabin walls, the trail to town completely impassable. But they had supplies, they had each other, and they had work to keep them busy. One morning in late January, Sophia woke feeling odd, her stomach churning uneasily. She made it outside before being violently sick in the snow, Harrison right behind her, holding her hair back and looking worried. "Are you all right? Did you eat something bad?" Sophia straightened, wiping her mouth, and suddenly understood. She did quick calculations in her head, thinking about missed cycles and tender breasts and bone-deep exhaustion she'd attributed to hard work. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh." Harrison's eyes widened. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I think so. I mean, I'm not completely certain, but all the signs point to it." She looked up at him, suddenly uncertain. "Are you all right with that? We didn't plan this, we barely planned any of this, and I know it's fast." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite the snow and the cold, his face transformed with joy. "All right with it? Sophia, that's incredible. That's the best news I could imagine." His enthusiasm was infectious, and Sophia found herself laughing, the morning sickness forgotten in the face of his pure happiness. "You really mean that?" "Of course I mean it. I want to build a life with you, a family, a future. This is all part of that." He set her down carefully, suddenly protective. "You should get back inside. It's too cold out here. Do you need anything? Are you feeling all right? Should we try to get to town, find a doctor?" Harrison breathed. "I'm fine. Women have been having babies forever. We have months to prepare." She took his hand, laced their fingers together. "But maybe we should try to get to town when the weather clears, just to make sure everything's all right, and to stock up on things we'll need." The rest of the winter passed in a haze of preparation and cautious excitement. Harrison became almost comically protective, insisting Sophia rest more, take on fewer chores, wrap up warmly whenever she went outside. She found it equal parts endearing and exasperating, but she loved him for it, for caring so deeply about her and their unborn child. When the snow finally began to melt in late March, they made the journey to Fort Garland. The doctor, an elderly man named Peterson, confirmed what Sophia already knew and predicted: an August birth. He pronounced her healthy and gave her instructions for the coming months, most of which Harrison committed to memory with intense concentration. They bought supplies, fabric for baby clothes, practical necessities. Word of Sophia's pregnancy spread quickly, and several ranch wives approached her with advice, offers of help, and hand-me-down baby clothes. Despite her initial fear of judgment, Sophia found herself welcomed into a community of women who understood the challenges of frontier life and supported each other through it. On the way back to the homestead, Harrison was quieter than usual. Finally, Sophia asked what was troubling him. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Women die in childbirth all the time out here. If something happened to you, if I lost you, I don't think I could bear it." Sophia took his hand. "I'm scared too, but women also give birth safely all the time. We have months to prepare and doctor." Peterson said, "I'm healthy and strong. We'll make sure we have help, that we're ready, and we'll face whatever comes together like we have everything else." Together, Harrison echoed, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Spring brought new life to the land and new work to the homestead. Calving season kept them busy, and Sophia insisted on helping despite Harrison's protests, arguing that she was pregnant, not an invalid. They lost 2 calves to late-season cold snaps but saved the rest, and their herd grew. Harrison talked about the future, about expanding their operation, maybe hiring a hand or two to help with the work. "I want to build something lasting," he said one evening, his hand resting on Sophia's growing belly. "Something we can pass down to our children and grandchildren. A real legacy." "We will," Sophia assured him. "We're already building it. Every fence we mend, every calf we save, every day we choose to stay and work and love this land. That's legacy." Summer came hot and bright, and Sophia grew heavy with child. The heat was oppressive, and she spent the worst afternoons resting in the shade, feeling the baby kick and roll inside her. Harrison was constantly attentive, bringing her cool water from the creek, making sure she stayed out of the sun during the hottest parts of the day. In early August, Sophia woke in the pre-dawn darkness with the first contractions. Harrison, who'd been sleeping lightly for weeks in anticipation of this moment, was immediately alert. "Is it time?" "I think so. They're still far apart, but they're definitely real." She tried to sound calm, but her voice shook slightly. Harrison had already made plans for this moment. He'd arranged for Mrs. Patterson, an experienced midwife from a neighboring homestead, to come when the time came. He rode out at dawn to fetch her, leaving Sophia with firm instructions to rest and not do anything strenuous, as if she had any other options at this point. Mrs. Patterson arrived by mid-morning, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who delivered dozens of babies and had the calm competence of someone who'd seen it all. She examined Sophia, pronounced everything progressing normally, and settled in to wait. Labor was long and hard, lasting through the day and into the evening. Harrison stayed close, holding Sophia's hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for putting her in this position in the first place. Mrs. Patterson found that hilarious, assuring Harrison that every woman in labor said similar things and none of them meant it. As the sun set, painting the mountains gold and crimson, Sophia gave one final push and their daughter entered the world, tiny and red and screaming with impressive volume. Mrs. Patterson cleaned her up, wrapped her in a soft blanket and placed her in Sophia's arms. "A daughter," the midwife announced, "healthy and strong, just like her mother." Sophia looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her entire world reorient around this small person. Harrison leaned over her shoulder, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide, and touched one finger to their daughter's tiny hand. She immediately gripped it with surprising strength, and Harrison let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Sophia, she's absolutely perfect." "She is," Sophia agreed, unable to look away from their daughter's face. What should we name her? They'd discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at this tiny person who'd made them a family, Harrison said quietly, "What about Hannah, after my mother, and maybe Margaret for a middle name after yours?" "Hannah Margaret Hayes." Sophia tested the name, smiled. "I love it. Hello, Hannah. Welcome to the world, little one." Mrs. Patterson stayed through the night to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then departed the next morning with Harrison's profound thanks and generous payment. Sophia spent the days recovering, marveling at her daughter, learning the rhythms of feeding and sleeping and the thousand small tasks that came with caring for an infant. Harrison was a devoted father from the first moment, taking on extra chores so Sophia could rest, walking the floor with Hannah when she fussed, staring at her with such obvious adoration that Sophia sometimes had to laugh at him. This rough cowboy who could rope a steer and break a horse was completely undone by one tiny girl. "I can't believe she's ours," he said one evening, holding Hannah while Sophia prepared supper. "I can't believe we made this perfect little person." "Well, I did most of the making," Sophia teased. "You helped at the beginning." Harrison grinned. "Fair point, but I'm more than willing to help make another one when you're ready." "Ask me again in a year," Sophia said dryly, though she was already thinking about siblings, about filling this homestead with children and laughter and love. The first year of Hannah's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights, first smiles, first teeth, first attempts at crawling. The homestead thrived alongside their growing family. Harrison hired a young man named Tom to help with the work, which freed up time for him to spend with Sophia and Hannah. They expanded the herd, improved the cabin, and began to save money toward building a larger house. On their second wedding anniversary, Harrison gave Sophia a necklace he'd commissioned in town, a simple silver pendant with 3 stones, one for each of them and one for Hannah. Sophia gave him a watch that had belonged to her father, which she'd kept carefully wrapped in her trunk all this time. "He would have wanted you to have it," she said as Harrison held the watch reverently. "He would have been so proud of you, of us, of what we've built together." That night, after Hannah was asleep in her cradle, they lay together in the darkness and talked about the future. More children, they agreed. A bigger house eventually. Maybe more land if they could acquire it. Dreams that had seemed impossible 2 years ago when Sophia had stood on a train platform with her life packed into a trunk. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked, pulling her close. "Choosing this instead of Boston?" Sophia thought about the train she'd refused to board, about the life she'd turned away from, about the leap of faith she'd taken with a stranger who'd offered her a choice. "Never. Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Time passed, marked by seasons and milestones. Hannah grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed her father around the ranch and helped her mother in the garden. Sophia found herself pregnant again when Hannah was 2, and their son, Henry James Hayes, arrived on a snowy December morning, making their family complete. Harrison's homestead grew into a successful ranch. They built the bigger house they'd dreamed of, with proper bedrooms for the children and a large kitchen where Sophia could work without feeling cramped. They acquired more land from a neighbor who was moving back east, expanding their grazing range. The cattle herd grew, and Harrison's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread throughout the county. Life wasn't always easy. There were harsh winters that tested them, years when the cattle prices were low, illnesses that scared them, the constant hard work that came with ranching. But they faced it all together, partners in every sense of the word, and somehow that made even the hard times bearable. Sophia sometimes thought about her stepmother, wondered what had become of the woman who'd sold her birthright for quick cash. She heard through town gossip that the woman had been abandoned by the salesman in Denver, left destitute. Sophia felt a moment of pity, but mostly she felt grateful. If not for her stepmother's betrayal, she never would have been standing on that depot platform. She never would have met Harrison. She never would have built this life. Marcus Thornton, who'd bought her father's ranch, ran it into the ground within 5 years and sold it at a loss. Harrison and Sophia were able to buy it back, piecing together Sophia's heritage with their own hard work. It felt like a circle closing, like justice of a sort. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their house, watching their children play in the yard. Hannah was 8 now, tall and confident, already an accomplished rider. Henry was 6, quieter than his sister but just as capable. Behind them, the house was full of life and laughter. Before them, the land stretched out, beautiful and harsh and home. "You remember the day we met?" Sophia asked, leaning into Harrison's side. "Every detail. You looked so angry and lost and determined all at once. I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. I thought you were insane, proposing marriage to a complete stranger." Harrison laughed. "I was a little insane. But I was also desperate to give you a chance, to offer you something other than defeat. I didn't expect to fall in love with you. That was just incredible luck." Sophia turned to face him, this man who'd given her back her life when everyone else had been ready to ship her away like an unwanted parcel. This man who'd seen her pain and offered her hope. This man who'd become her partner, her love, her home. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I ever thought possible. I love you too." Harrison kissed her softly, then deeper, and Sophia felt the same spark she'd felt the first time, amplified by 10 years of shared life and love and work. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for taking a chance on a crazy cowboy with more dreams than sense. Thank you for lifting my trunk off that train. Thank you for saying stay." They stood together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors. Hannah called out something about a rabbit she'd seen, and Henry was demanding that his father come see the frog he'd caught. The cattle were lowing in the distance, and smoke rose from the chimney of the house they'd built together. This was their legacy. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the life they'd created from nothing. The love they'd built from a desperate gamble and a leap of faith. The family they'd made against all odds. Sophia had been shipped back to Fort Garland like a parcel at the depot. Unwanted and discarded, her future decided by people who didn't care about what she wanted. But Harrison had lifted her trunk and said stay, and in doing so, he'd given her back her life. Together, they'd built something beautiful and lasting and real. Years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. The children grew, taking on more responsibilities, learning the land the way Sophia had once learned it from her father. Hannah proved to have her mother's gift for horses, and her father's steady determination. Henry was quieter but observant, with a talent for reading the weather and understanding the cattle that even Harrison admitted surpassed his own. When Hannah turned 16, she began courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a respectful young man named Daniel, who Harrison approved of after several long, pointed conversations. Sophia watched her daughter navigate the complexities of young love and remembered her own unconventional beginning, the leap of faith that had brought her here. "You think we should tell her?" Sophia asked Harrison one evening after Hannah had gone starry-eyed to bed following a church social where Daniel had been particularly attentive. "About how we really started, about the marriage of convenience that became real," Harrison considered it. "I think we should. I think she should know that sometimes love doesn't look like the storybooks say it should. That sometimes it starts with practical decisions and grows into something real. That might be a valuable lesson." So they told Hannah, sitting her down one Sunday afternoon and explaining the circumstances of their marriage, how Sophia had been left with nothing, how Harrison had offered her a choice, how they'd built love from partnership and respect and shared goals. Hannah listened with wide eyes, absorbing it all. "That's so romantic," she said finally, which made both her parents laugh. "Romantic," Sophia repeated. "I'd have called it desperate." "No, it really is," Hannah insisted. "Papa saw you needed help and offered it without expecting anything in return. And you were brave enough to take the risk. And then you fell in love for real. That's more romantic than any story where people just meet at a dance and decide they're meant to be." Sophia looked at Harrison, saw her own surprise reflected in his face. Maybe their daughter was right. Maybe there was something deeply romantic about choosing each other, about building love deliberately instead of just falling into it. Henry turned out to have a gift for numbers and organization that neither parent quite understood but deeply appreciated. By the time he was 14, he was managing the ranch accounts and had ideas about diversification and investment that actually made sense. Harrison, who'd always operated on instinct and hard work, was impressed and slightly bewildered by his son's business acumen. "He gets that from your side," Harrison told Sophia. "Your father was always sharp with numbers." "And he gets his quietness from you," Sophia countered. "That way of watching everything before making a move." They were both right, and both proud beyond measure. As the children grew older and more independent, Sophia and Harrison found themselves with more time together, returning to the partnership that had started everything. They worked side by side as always, but now there was also time for quiet evenings on the porch, for rides across the property without specific purpose, for the comfortable intimacy of a long marriage. On their 20th anniversary, Harrison took Sophia back to Fort Garland, to the train depot where it had all begun. The building was the same, weathered by 2 decades of mountain weather but essentially unchanged. They stood on the platform, and Sophia remembered that day so clearly. The heat, the anger, the crushing sense of having no choices. "I stood right here," she said quietly, pointing, "looking at that trunk and thinking about that train and feeling like my life was over. And I stood there," Harrison indicated a spot near the depot door, "trying to work up the courage to do something completely crazy. I'd been thinking about it for days, since I heard what your stepmother had done. I knew you were coming back, knew they were sending you away again. I kept thinking about you losing your father and your home all at once, and it made me so angry. And then I saw you, and you looked exactly how I'd felt when my family died. Lost and furious and trying to be brave. And I just knew I had to do something. Best crazy decision you ever made." Without question. He pulled her close, kissed her temple. "Marry me again." Sophia pulled back to look at him. "What? Marry me again? Right here where it started. Renew our vows, but this time do it right. With our kids here and friends, and because we choose each other every single day, not just because circumstances pushed us together." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. After 20 years he could still surprise her, could still find ways to show her how much he loved her. Yes, absolutely yes. They planned it for a month later, giving them time to organize. It wasn't a big affair, just close friends and family gathered at the depot on a golden September afternoon. Hannah and Henry stood with them, along with several ranch families who'd become dear friends over the years. The current justice of the peace, Samuel Garrett's son Thomas, officiated. This time, Sophia wore a beautiful dress she'd made herself, deep blue like the Colorado sky. Harrison wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes but devastatingly handsome. They stood exactly where they'd stood 20 years before, but everything was different now. 20 years ago, Harrison said, holding both her hands, I asked you to take a chance on a stranger with nothing but land and hope to offer. You were brave enough to say yes, and it's been the greatest honor of my life to be your husband. I promise to continue choosing you every day for as long as we both live. I love you, Sophia. I always will. Sophia's voice was thick with emotion. 20 years ago, you gave me back my life when I thought I'd lost everything. You offered me partnership and respect and the chance to build something real. You've been my home, my partner, my love ever since. I promise to continue choosing you every day for as long as we both live. I love you, Harrison. I always will. Thomas pronounced them still married, which got a laugh from the assembled guests, and Harrison kissed Sophia thoroughly, to the cheers and catcalls of their children and friends. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful, held at their ranch with food and music and dancing under the stars. Sophia danced with Harrison, with her son, with her daughters Beau, Daniel, with neighbors and friends. She looked around at the life they'd built, the community they were part of, the family they'd created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home, and Hannah was showing Daniel the horses by lantern light while Henry tended the fire, Sophia and Harrison walked out to the edge of their property. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky, and the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gotten on that train?" Harrison asked. Sophia shook her head. "Never. There's no point in wondering about paths not taken. This is the life I have, the life I chose, and it's more than I ever dreamed possible. Even when things were hard, even during those first winters when we barely had enough to eat, or when the cattle prices crashed and we thought we might lose everything. Even then. Especially then, because we faced it together." She turned to face him, this man who'd aged gracefully, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "You gave me a choice when everyone else was trying to take my choices away. That's what made all the difference." "You saved me too, you know," Harrison said softly. "I was so lonely before you. I had land and dreams, but no one to share them with. You made everything mean something." They stood together under the vast western sky, two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. The ranch spread around them, the tangible proof of what they'd built together. In the distance, they could hear Hannah's laughter and the low murmur of Henry talking to the cattle he tended with such care. More years passed, bringing changes and constancy in equal measure. Hannah married Daniel in a ceremony at the ranch, and they settled on his family's land adjoining the Hayes property. Henry showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on expanding the ranch's operations and experimenting with new breeding techniques. Both children remained close, visiting often, and gradually the ranch became a true family operation spanning 2 generations. Sophia's hair turned silver, and Harrison developed a limp from an old injury that ached in cold weather. They slowed down, gradually turning over more of the day-to-day operations to Henry and the hands they employed. But they still rode out together most mornings, checking fence lines and water sources, reading the land they knew so intimately. When Sophia was 45, Hannah presented them with their first grandchild, a daughter named Sophia Marie. Holding her namesake, Sophia felt the circle of life turn, understanding in a new way what her father must have felt watching her grow up. The fierce love, the hope for the future, the desire to protect this small person from all harm while also giving her the strength to face life's challenges. "She looks like you," Harrison said, peering over Sophia's shoulder at the sleeping baby. "Same determined little chin." "Poor child," Sophia said affectionately. "That chin caused me no end of trouble. That chin is what made you brave enough to stay. I'm counting on young Sophia here to have the same courage." More grandchildren followed. Hannah had 3 children total, and eventually Henry surprised everyone by falling in love with a schoolteacher from Fort Garland named Rebecca. They married when he was 28, and she brought her own brand of organization and intelligence to the ranch, helping Henry expand operations even further. On their 30th anniversary, Sophia and Harrison took a rare trip away from the ranch, traveling to Denver for a week. It was strange being in a city again, surrounded by buildings and people and noise. Sophia found she had no nostalgia for urban life. The mountains called to her, and she was relieved to return home. "I can't imagine living anywhere else," she told Harrison as they approached the ranch. the familiar buildings coming into view. This is where I belong. This is where I've always belonged. Me too, Harrison agreed. I used to think I'd want to travel, see other places. But everything I need is right here. They settled back into ranch life, into the comfortable rhythms of work and family. They took joy in their grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope, telling them stories about the old days when the ranch was just starting out. Young Sophia was particularly fascinated by the story of her grandmother's arrival in Fort Garland, how she'd almost been shipped away but chose to stay instead. "You were so brave, Grandma," the girl said one afternoon while helping Sophia in the garden. She was 8 now, all long legs and curiosity. "I was desperate," Sophia corrected gently. "Brave came later after I decided to stay. The trick in life, little one, is learning to tell the difference between giving up and letting go, between being stubborn and being strong. I was lucky that your grandfather appeared when he did and offered me a real choice. Grandpa says you saved him too. We saved each other. That's what love does when it's real. It makes both people better, stronger. Remember that when you're older and thinking about these things." Young Sophia nodded seriously, absorbing the wisdom, and Sophia smiled. This child had her father's business sense and her mother's warmth, and would likely grow up to do remarkable things. Time moved forward as it always did. The grandchildren grew, and eventually great-grandchildren began to arrive. The ranch continued to thrive, now a substantial operation that employed multiple hands and was respected throughout the territory. Harrison and Sophia, now in their 60s, spent most of their time on the porch, watching their family work the land they'd fought so hard to build. "We did good," Harrison said one evening, his hand clasped with Sophia's. His grip was still strong, though his hands were gnarled with arthritis now. "Against all odds, we did real good." "We did," Sophia agreed. "Better than good. We built something that will last long after we're gone." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains they'd called home for over 40 years. The land was the same, eternal and unchanging in the ways that mattered. But the life they'd built on it was rich and full and exactly what they'd dreamed of during those first uncertain days. On their 45th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were so many people now, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, along with extended family and close friends who'd become family over the years. The house and yard were full of noise and laughter and love. Sophia stood on the porch, watching everyone, and felt Harrison come up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist in a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her hair. "Happy anniversary." She leaned back against him, grateful for his solid presence. "Can you believe it's been 45 years? Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like forever in the best possible way." He turned her to face him. "I'd do it all again. Every moment, every hardship, every joy. I choose you every time. I choose you too. I'll always choose you." They kissed, gentle and sweet, and their assembled family broke into applause and cheering. Sophia laughed, embarrassed and pleased, and Harrison just grinned. Later, after the party had wound down and the younger children had been put to bed, Sophia and Harrison walked out to the spot where they always went when they needed to think or talk or just be together. It was a small rise overlooking the creek, with a view of the mountains that never failed to take Sophia's breath away. "I've been thinking," Harrison said, settling down on the bench he'd built here years ago, "about what happens after, to the ranch, to the family." "Henry's more than capable of running things," Sophia said, sitting beside him. "And Rebecca is brilliant with the business side. Between them and Hannah and Daniel, the ranch will be fine, better than fine. I know, I'm not worried about that. He was quiet for a moment. I'm worried about you. About what happens when one of us goes and leaves the other alone. Sophia took his hand, laced their fingers together. They'd had this conversation before, usually late at night when one of them couldn't sleep. We'll face that when it comes, together, for as long as we can. And then whoever's left will keep going because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. Promise me something, Harrison said intensely. Promise me that if I go first, you won't give up. You'll keep riding, keep living, keep being you. Don't just fade away. I promise. And you have to promise me the same thing. If I go first, you keep on. You enjoy the grandchildren and the ranch and the life we built. No giving up. I promise. They sat together as the stars came out, as the mountains turned from purple to black, as the night sounds of the ranch settled around them. They'd made their promises and they'd keep them, because that's what they did. They kept faith with each other, always had, always would. Years passed, more slowly now but no less rich for it. Sophia and Harrison aged gracefully, their health holding up better than many of their contemporaries. They credited the clean mountain air, the good food from their own land, and the active life they'd always led. But mostly, Sophia thought, it was having something to live for, having purpose and love and family. On a bright morning in spring, when Sophia was 72 and Harrison 77, they rode out together across the ranch. It was something they still did most days when weather permitted, though their rides were shorter now and at a gentler pace. They followed the creek up toward the mountains, through meadows just beginning to green up after winter, past cattle that barely looked up as they passed. Still the most beautiful place on earth, Harrison said, and Sophia nodded agreement. They stopped at their usual spot, the bench on the rise, and sat together looking at the view they'd looked at thousands of times before and would never tire of. Harrison's hand found hers, and they sat in the comfortable silence of people who'd spent a lifetime together and didn't always need words. Thank you, Harrison said finally. For what? For staying. For saying yes to a crazy cowboy at a train depot 45 years ago. For building this life with me. For everything. Sophia turned to him, saw the depth of love in his eyes, still as strong as it had been all those years ago when they'd first truly fallen for each other. Thank you for giving me the choice, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for loving me every day of our life together. They kissed, sweet and familiar, and then sat together as the sun climbed higher, as the hawks circled overhead, as the ranch woke up fully to another day of life and work. The years that followed were peaceful, marked by the gentle rhythms of ranch life and family gatherings. More great-grandchildren arrived, and Sophia and Harrison watched them all with the bemused pride of people who'd somehow lived long enough to see their legacy extend into the future in tangible, noisy, wonderful ways. When Harrison was 83, he fell ill with pneumonia one harsh February. Despite the doctor's best efforts, despite Sophia's devoted nursing and the prayers of their large family, he weakened steadily over the course of a week. On the 8th day, with Sophia holding his hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around, Harrison opened his eyes and looked directly at his wife. "It's been a good life," he said softly. "The best life. Thank you for sharing it with me." "Thank you for starting it," Sophia replied, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, I'll always love you. Love you too. Forever." He smiled, squeezed her hand weakly, and closed his eyes. An hour later he was gone. The grief was enormous, overwhelming, a physical pain in Sophia's chest. After 51 years together, Harrison was so woven into the fabric of her life that his absence left a hole nothing could fill. But she'd made him a promise, and she intended to keep it. She kept riding, kept living, kept being present for her family even when all she wanted was to curl up and disappear into her grief. Henry and Rebecca urged her to move into their house, but Sophia refused. The cabin, expanded and improved over the years but still fundamentally the same place where she and Harrison had built their life, was where she needed to be. She could feel him there in every corner, every piece of furniture they'd chosen together, every view from every window. She spoke to him sometimes when she was alone, told him about the grandchildren, about ranch business, about the little details of life he would have wanted to know. She thought he would have found it silly, but it brought her comfort. Spring came, then summer, and gradually the sharp edge of grief dulled to something more bearable. Sophia rode out to the bench on the rise often, sat in the spot where they'd sat together so many times, and felt close to Harrison there. She told him about her days, about the family, about how much she missed him but how she was keeping her promise, staying strong and present. On what would have been their 52nd anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a memorial celebration of Harrison's life. They told stories and shared memories and laughed through tears. Young Sophia, now a woman of 30 with children of her own, stood up and spoke about what her grandparents' love story had taught her. "Grandma and Grandpa showed us that love isn't just about the romantic moments," she said. "It's about choosing each other every day. It's about partnership and respect and building something together. It's about being brave enough to take chances and strong enough to keep promises. They showed us what real love looks like, and we're all better for it." Sophia, sitting in her chair with her great-grandchildren clustered around her, felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were good tears, grateful tears. Harrison was gone, but what they'd built together remained. The ranch, the family, the love, all of it continued. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Sophia walked out to the rise one more time. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors the way it had on so many evenings before. She sat on the bench, felt Harrison's presence beside her as clearly as if he were really there. "We did it," she said softly to the mountains and the sky and the spirit of the man she'd loved. "We built something beautiful, something that will last. Thank you for lifting my trunk that day. Thank you for saying stay. It was the best decision I ever made." The wind whispered through the pines, and Sophia imagined it was Harrison's voice, telling her he loved her, he was proud of her, that their story was worth every moment of uncertainty and risk. Sophia lived for 3 more years after Harrison's death, years filled with family and purpose, and the land she'd always loved. She taught her great-grandchildren to ride, told them stories about the old days, and made sure they understood the value of what they'd been given. She kept the ranch running smoothly, consulting with Henry on major decisions but trusting him to lead. On a golden afternoon in September, when she was 75, Sophia rode out one last time to the bench on the rise. She sat in her favorite spot, looked at the mountains she'd gazed at for over 50 years, and felt a deep sense of peace. She'd lived a good life, a full life, exactly the life she'd chosen when she'd stayed instead of boarding that train. Henry found her there an hour later, sitting peacefully, her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. She'd slipped away quietly, in the place she loved best, and somehow that felt right. Fitting. They buried her next to Harrison on a small hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Colorado sky. The whole family gathered, along with what seemed like half the county, to pay their respects to a woman who'd been a pillar of the community for over half a century. Young Sophia, giving the eulogy, spoke of her grandmother's courage and strength, her partnership with Harrison, the legacy they'd built together. She spoke of a woman who'd stood on a train platform with nothing and had chosen to build something beautiful rather than accept defeat. She spoke of love and family and the power of choosing your own path. They shipped her back like a parcel at the depot, Sophia said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. But my grandfather lifted her trunk and said, "Stay." And she was brave enough to do it, to take that chance, to build a life with a stranger who became her everything. They showed us all what's possible when you're brave enough to choose love, to choose partnership, to choose hope even when everything seems lost. That's their legacy. That's what they gave us. The ranch continued, passed down through generations, always held by Hayes family members who understood its value, who remembered the stories of Harrison and Sophia and the love that had built everything. The bench on the rise became a family landmark, a place to go when you needed to think or to feel connected to those who'd come before. And sometimes, on golden afternoons when the light hit the mountains just right, people said you could feel a presence there. Two spirits sitting together, holding hands, looking out over the land they'd loved. Two people who'd started as strangers and become forever, who'd built something lasting from nothing more than courage and hope, and the simple decision to stay. Their story became legend in the family, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of how Sophia had been sent away and chose to remain, how Harrison had offered her partnership and it had grown into the deepest love, how together they'd built not just a ranch but a legacy of strength and commitment and choosing each other always. Young couples in the family, facing their own challenges and uncertainties, would visit the graves on the hill or sit on the bench at the rise and ask for guidance. And somehow, in the quiet whisper of wind through pines, in the vast beauty of the mountain vistas, in the solid ground beneath their feet that generations of Hayes hands had worked and loved, they found their answers. Because Harrison and Sophia had shown them all that love isn't always lightning strikes and love at first sight. Sometimes it's a practical decision that grows into something extraordinary. Sometimes it's choosing partnership and respect and building something together. Sometimes it's a stranger lifting your trunk at a depot and saying, "Stay," and being brave enough to do it. And sometimes that's the most romantic story of all.